Does anyone else see January as blue? Hi, I'm Stacy, and I'm pursuing a career as an oil painter while I work my full-time job. Welcome to Monthly Minis, where I paint a small study to celebrate our current month. Winter is my favorite season, and I live around Chicago, so it's very, very cold. There's lots of snow and icicles and frost, and all those things say blue to me. I love when the snow is falling outside and I'm here under 3 blankets with a hot drink. It's the best part of winter, and it will always be a hot drink because ice doesn't belong in this mug. Or any mug, just to be clear where I stand. Anyway, back to my monthly mini. So I had so much fun doing the winter holly that I wanted to stick with the theme of berries, but I wanted something that was still wintry. So I decided on January Juniper. I start out every painting with a very detailed drawing. Drawing is my strength, so it's easier for me to problem solve at this point rather than on the later stages where I'm less comfortable. The toughest part of the juniper was the anatomy. I found a bunch of reference pictures to study the berries and the needles. The berries were in these big clusters and the needles almost looked soft. So I drew out a composition that looked good to me with lots and lots of berries, because that's the fun part, and the light coming in from the right. Then I doused it with fixative and moved on to the underpainting. I used burnt sienna for the imprimatura and then a mixture of burnt sienna, burnt umber, and flake white for the underpainting. The underpainting was relatively easy, but it was extremely time consuming. I think it ended up taking me about 3 days. This layer also hinted at some of the issues that I was going to have in the color layer, mainly with texture. When I started on the color layer, I knew immediately that I was going to have to use multiple glazes. I always use glazes on my color layer. It's just a question of how many and how transparent. Juniper berries have this frosty, almost velvety texture to them, and that was very, very difficult for me to get across in the color layer. If I could go back, I would have made the shadows of the berries much less intense and just made those really, really dark shadows in very strategic places. But overall, they were really fun to paint, and I'm happy with them. The needles were my least favorite part, but this is when the glazes came in handy. On each of the needles, there's this overlapping layer that almost looks like fish scales, but there's also a very pronounced highlight and a very dark shadow. And then still that little bit of texture to make them look soft. So I ended up using one glaze for the highlights and the shadows, one for the pattern, and then one more highlight layer just to add that little bit of texture and softness. If I had tried to do this all at once, it would have just looked muddy. And again, I was overall happy with how it turned out. And then in no time, I was putting on the final layer of varnish, and January Juniper was complete. So personally, I do think it looks very much like January. It's very frosty and wintry, but still cozy. So because I had so much fun doing the December holly and the January Juniper, I am going to keep the berry theme going. And I mean berries in a cultural and culinary aspect, not botanical, because technically then neither of these are berries. So if you're interested to see what berry I pick for February, like, follow, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you when I clock out.